Have you ever walked into a room full of people who were supposed to love you, only to realize you never truly belonged there? My name is Natasha Carter, and the worst day of my life didn't happen on a random Tuesday. It happened on Thanksgiving, the one holiday that's supposed to bring families together. The holiday where people laugh, forgive, and share a meal around one table. For my family, it became the day they broke me, and they did it in front of everyone. But what none of them knew was that the daughter they humiliated would one day become the woman they desperately needed. And when that day came, I remembered every tear, every insult, every moment they made me feel worthless. This is my story. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood outside Boston. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. My father, Richard, owned a small construction company. My mother, Linda, was known in the neighborhood for hosting beautiful family dinners. My younger sister, Emily, was everyone's favorite. Then there was me, the invisible daughter. No matter how hard I worked, it was never enough. If I earned an A in school, my mother would ask why it wasn't an A+. If I cleaned the entire house, she'd point out the one corner I missed. If Emily forgot to do something, my mother smiled and said, "She's still learning." If I made the same mistake, I was called selfish, lazy, and ungrateful. As I grew older, I stopped asking for love. I only hoped for respect. But even that felt impossible. When I graduated from college, I found a decent office job and rented a small apartment. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. For the first time, I had peace. I rarely visited home because every visit ended with another argument, another insult, or another reminder that I would never be enough. Then, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, my phone rang. It was my mother. She almost never called me first. I answered carefully. "Hello?" Her voice sounded strangely calm. "Natasha, we're having Thanksgiving dinner this year. Everyone will be here. I think it's time you came home." I was speechless. For years, she'd barely acknowledged me. Now she was inviting me? "Really?" I asked. "Yes," she replied. "Let's leave the past behind." For the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe things could change. Maybe she missed me. Maybe she'd finally realized how unfair she'd been. Maybe I was finally going to have the family I'd always dreamed of. So I bought a homemade pumpkin pie from a local bakery, wrapped a small gift for my grandmother, and even spent extra money on a new dress. As I drove toward my childhood home on Thanksgiving afternoon, I kept imagining how the evening would end. Maybe my mother would hug me. Maybe we'd laugh together. Maybe this would become our new beginning. I had no idea I was driving straight toward the biggest humiliation of my life. The moment I stepped onto my parents' front porch, I could already smell the roasted turkey. The house looked exactly the way I remembered it. Warm lights glowed through the windows. Laughter echoed from inside. Cars filled the driveway. For a second, I smiled. Maybe this really was a fresh start. I rang the doorbell. My grandmother opened the door first. "Oh, Natasha," she said softly, before giving me a quick hug. It wasn't a long embrace, but after years of feeling invisible, it meant everything. Inside the house, almost 20 relatives had already gathered. My uncles were watching football in the living room. My aunts were setting desserts on the kitchen counter. Children ran through the hallway laughing. For a brief moment, it felt like I actually belonged. Then I saw my mother. Linda Carter looked at me for only a second. "You finally made it," she said coldly. No hug, no smile, no welcome, just those 3 words. I forced a smile anyway. I brought Grandma her favorite pumpkin pie. Without even looking at it, my mother took the box from my hands and placed it on the counter. "Leave it there." That was it. No thank you. No appreciation. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe she was just busy preparing dinner. As the evening continued, I noticed something familiar. Emily was surrounded by attention. Everyone complimented her new engagement ring. My mother couldn't stop talking about how proud she was. Meanwhile, no one asked about my life. No one asked about my job. No one even noticed I'd recently earned a promotion. I sat quietly, pretending it didn't hurt. Finally, my father announced, "Dinner's ready." Everyone gathered around the long dining table. It looked beautiful. Golden turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, cranberry sauce, fresh rolls, the kind of Thanksgiving dinner you'd see in a magazine. There was one empty chair. Mine. I sat down, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. Then my mother disappeared into the kitchen. A few seconds later, she returned carrying a large Thanksgiving plate. Steam rose from the turkey. The mashed potatoes were covered in gravy. She walked directly toward me. For the first time that evening, she was looking straight at me. I actually felt my heart racing. Maybe this was her way of saying she was sorry. Maybe she'd realized how much she'd hurt me over the years. As she stopped beside my chair, she gave me a small smile. I smiled back. Slowly, I reached out with both hands to take the plate. Then, smack! The slap exploded across my face. The force knocked my head to one side. The room fell completely silent. The plate crashed onto the hardwood floor. Turkey, gravy, mashed potatoes, everywhere. I could feel my cheek burning. My ears were ringing. For several seconds, I couldn't even breathe. I looked up at my mother. Her face was filled with anger. She pointed directly at me. "You don't deserve to eat at this family's table," she shouted. "You've always been selfish. You only come around when it's convenient. You've embarrassed this family for the last time." Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward me. I looked at my father. He lowered his head. I looked at Emily. She didn't say a single word. Some relatives looked uncomfortable. Others simply stared at their plates. Not one person stood up for me. Not one person said, "That's enough." Tears filled my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Without saying a word, I slowly stood up. I picked up my purse from the chair. I looked around the table one last time. The people I had spent my entire life trying to impress couldn't even defend me for 10 seconds. I whispered only 4 words. "I won't forget this." Then I turned around, walked to the front door, and left. Behind me, the Thanksgiving dinner continued. Ahead of me, a completely different life was waiting. That was the last Thanksgiving I would ever spend in my parents' house. None of them knew it yet. But before another Thanksgiving arrived, everything they believed they had would be gone. I cried the entire drive back to my apartment. Not because my mother had slapped me, not even because she had humiliated me in front of my entire family. I cried because, deep down, I had spent 27 years hoping she would finally love me. That night, I finally accepted the truth. She never would. The next morning, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror. My cheek was still slightly swollen. I looked at my reflection and whispered, "No one will ever treat me like that again." Those 7 words changed my life. A week later, I resigned from my office job. Everyone thought I was crazy. Even my closest friend Sarah asked, "Natasha, are you sure you have a stable paycheck?" I smiled. "I don't want a stable life anymore. I want a meaningful one." For years, I had dreamed of opening my own interior design company. I loved transforming empty spaces into beautiful homes, but fear had always stopped me. After Thanksgiving, fear no longer controlled me, because nothing could hurt more than what my own family had already done. I packed everything I owned into my small SUV and moved to Chicago. I knew no one there. I rented a tiny 1-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and broken kitchen cabinets. The first few months were brutal. Some nights I survived on instant noodles. Some weeks I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. Clients canceled. Bills piled up. More than once I stared at my bank account and saw less than $40 left. Every time I wanted to quit, I remembered that Thanksgiving table. I remembered my mother's words, "You don't deserve to eat with this family." Instead of breaking me, those words became fuel. I worked 16-hour days. I designed homes during the day. At night, I learned marketing, business management, and real estate. I never stopped learning. Slowly, one satisfied client became 5, 5 became 20, 20 became hundreds. Within 4 years, my small company had grown into one of Chicago's fastest-growing luxury interior design firms. We designed restaurants, hotels, luxury apartments, celebrity homes. Magazines started writing about my work. Local TV stations invited me for interviews. Then something unbelievable happened. A national home renovation network offered me my own television series. The girl who had once been told she didn't deserve a seat at the family table was suddenly inspiring millions of people across America. Financially, my life changed completely. I bought a beautiful home overlooking Lake Michigan. I paid off every debt. I created scholarships for young women starting small businesses. For the first time in my life, I felt proud of the person I had become. But success didn't erase the memories. Every Thanksgiving, I still remembered that slap. Every Thanksgiving, I wondered if my family had ever regretted what they did. Then, 5 years after that unforgettable dinner, my phone rang. The caller ID made my heart stop. Dad. He hadn't called me in almost 3 years. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Hello? His voice sounded older, weaker. Natasha. There was a long silence. Then he quietly said, "We need your help." At that moment, I knew something had happened, and for the first time, the family who had once thrown me away had nowhere else to turn. For several seconds, I couldn't say a word. My father had barely spoken to me since that Thanksgiving. Now he was calling me, not to apologize, not to ask how I was doing, but because he needed something. I finally broke the silence. What happened? His voice trembled. My construction company went bankrupt. I closed my eyes. The company he had spent 30 years building was gone. We lost the house, he continued. The bank took everything. I didn't interrupt. He kept talking. Emily's husband left her. Mom, she's been very sick. And, he paused, we don't know what to do anymore. For a moment, I remembered being that little girl who would have done anything to hear my father say he was proud of me. Instead, the only time he ever called was when everything had fallen apart. Then came the question I already knew was coming. Natasha, could you help us? I looked out the window of my office. Below me, Chicago moved like it always had. People rushed to work. Cars filled the streets. Life kept moving, just like mine had. I'll think about it, I said quietly. Before hanging up, my father whispered something I had never heard from him before. I'm sorry. The line went dead. A week later, there was another knock on my office door. My assistant stepped inside. Miss Carter, there's a family here asking to see you. I frowned. They said they're your parents. My heart skipped a beat. I walked into the reception area. There they were. My father looked exhausted. His suit was old and wrinkled. My sister Emily stood beside him, holding the hand of her little son. And then, I saw my mother, Linda Carter, the same woman who had slapped me in front of my entire family. She looked nothing like I remembered. Her hair had turned gray. Her shoulders were bent. The confidence she once carried had disappeared. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Finally, my mother stepped forward. Tears filled her eyes. Natasha, I'm so sorry. I waited. She continued. I've replayed that Thanksgiving in my mind 1,000 times. I don't expect you to forgive me, but if I could go back, I would. Those words should have healed me. Instead, they reminded me how long it had taken for her to say them. 5 years. 5 years of silence. 5 years without a birthday card, without a phone call, without asking if I was alive. Now, because life had become difficult, she wanted another chance. Emily began crying. We've been staying with different relatives. No one wants us there anymore. We don't have anywhere else to go. I looked at every face in front of me. The same people who had watched me walk out of Thanksgiving dinner alone. Not one of them had followed me. Not one had defended me. Now, they stood in front of me asking for compassion. I took a deep breath. I'll help. Their faces lit up with hope. Then I finished my sentence. But not in the way you expect. I paid for my mother's medical treatment. I found a small apartment for my father. I helped Emily find a job so she could support herself and her son. But I never gave them cash. I never invited them into my home. And I never pretended the past had never happened. Before they left, my father asked quietly, "Will we ever be a family again?" I looked at him for a long time. Then I answered honestly, "Some things can be repaired, but trust." I paused. Trust has to be earned. A few months later, as Thanksgiving approached once again, I received a handwritten letter. It was from my mother. Inside was a single sentence. "If you ever find it in your heart, please let us spend one more Thanksgiving with you." I folded the letter, looked out the window, and made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. Thanksgiving morning arrived. For the first time in my life, I wasn't driving to my parents' house. People were driving to mine. My home overlooked Lake Michigan. The dining room was filled with warm lights, fresh flowers, and the smell of roasted turkey. The table was beautiful, but this time, I was sitting at the head of it. Around noon, the doorbell rang. One by one, my family walked inside. My father, my mother, Emily, my grandmother, aunts, uncles, even the cousins who had watched me leave in tears 5 years earlier. The room felt strangely quiet. No one knew what to say. I greeted everyone politely. No anger, no insults, just respect. Dinner was almost ready. As everyone found their seats, I noticed something. My mother wasn't sitting down. She was standing near the doorway, looking at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm not sure I deserve to be here," she whispered. I looked at her for a moment. Then I pointed to an empty chair. "Please, sit." She slowly sat down. A few minutes later, I walked into the kitchen. When I came back, I was holding a single Thanksgiving plate. The room became completely silent. Every eye followed me. I walked toward my mother. Her hands began to shake. I could see the fear in her eyes. She remembered. She remembered exactly what had happened 5 years ago. I stopped beside her chair. The room was so quiet, you could hear people breathing. Then, instead of raising my hand, I gently placed the Thanksgiving plate in front of her. My mother looked down at the plate, then back at me. Tears rolled down her face. "I don't understand," she whispered. I smiled softly. "5 years ago, you taught me something I'll never forget. You taught me how much pain one moment can cause." I paused. "But life taught me something even greater. If I become the same person who hurt me, then they win." More tears filled my mother's eyes. I continued. "I didn't invite you here for revenge. I invited you here so this family could finally face the truth." I looked around the table. That night, when my mother slapped me, every single one of you stayed silent. You didn't hit me, but your silence hurt just as much. No one could meet my eyes. My father slowly stood up, his voice cracked. "I failed you. I should have protected my daughter." He walked over to me. For the first time in my entire life, he wrapped his arms around me. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become." Those were the words I had waited 27 years to hear. Emily stood next. "I'm sorry for staying quiet. I was afraid of upsetting Mom. I should have stood beside you." One after another, every member of the family apologized. Not because they wanted money, not because they needed help, but because they finally understood the damage they had caused. I looked at my mother. She could barely speak through her tears. "I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope you'll remember that I truly regret what I did." I reached across the table and held her hand. "I forgive you." The room fell silent again. But forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It simply allows us to build a better future. That Thanksgiving, for the first time, we ate together without lies, without pretending, without favorites, just as a family trying to become better than they had been. As dessert was served, my grandmother smiled and said, "This is the first real Thanksgiving we've ever had." Everyone laughed through their tears. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I stood alone on my balcony, watching the city lights reflect across the lake. I realized something. Success wasn't the greatest revenge. Money wasn't the greatest revenge. Even proving them wrong wasn't the greatest revenge. The greatest revenge was refusing to let their cruelty decide the kind of person I would become. Because in the end, the girl who once left a Thanksgiving table with tears in her eyes became the woman who built a table where respect was always served first. If this story touched your heart, remember this. Sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who get even, they're the ones who refuse to become like those who hurt them.